A breakthrough to break the blockade. After 3 years of discord, are Doha and Riyadh ready to restore ties? I'm Ali Aslan, and today's newsmaker is the potential reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The Arab world was rocked by a bitter diplomatic rift that erupted between Doha and Riyadh in 2017. Saudi Arabia and its regional allies imposed a crippling blockade on Qatar, accusing the country of supporting terrorism. But it appears a deal to end the dispute is now within reach. Kuwait has played a central role in trying to repair the broken relationship.
As part of the reconciliation efforts led by His Majesty Sabah al-Ahmad al-Jabbar al-Sabah, and in continuation of the efforts by His Majesty Nawaf al-Ahmad al-Sabah, Emir of Kuwait, and US President Donald Trump to solve the crisis, fruitful discussions have taken place recently in which all sides expressed their keenness for Gulf and Arab unity and stability.
But the US president's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner is receiving a lot of credit too for his part in the recent thaw in relations. Kushner's trip to the region is thought to have helped negotiations between Doha and Riyadh. Though while the Trump administration is hailing this as a huge breakthrough, others suggest there's still a long way to go. So, how close are we really to a fully restored relationship? To discuss this, I am joined now from Riyadh by Saudi and Gulf Affairs expert Mohammed al Qubaiban. Mahjoob Zweiri is in Doha. He's the director of the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University. And Annelle Sheline is a research fellow in the Middle East program at the Quincy Institute. Mohammed, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, we hear, are making progress to end the 3-year rifts. The Saudi foreign minister has said the final agreement is within reach. When can we expect an official announcement?
Hi, Ali. Nice to see you again. There was no a final statement, but I think there is a quite good progress in solving this problem. And since it started about few days ago, up to yesterday, the good news is the whole four countries are going to get together with the Qataris delegation, and inshallah it will be solved. But what's inside, what's more details, nobody knows. But they sounds like there is going to be a good progress, and inshallah they will come over this problem. This is the good news. The other thing is all members, Qatar and the other four countries, are willing really to solve the problems, the changes in the region, the strategic changes, the challenges. It's getting difficult more and more. So I think I think they are all willing to solve the problem.
So the will to solve the problem.
That they come up with the final.
Indeed, but the will, as you say, Mohammed, is certainly there to solve the problem. Mahjoob, how is this news being received in Doha, where you're based?
I think this effort is a result of at least 1 year efforts we were following on, whether done by the Americans or done by the former Emir of Kuwait. So that is another, I would say, phase of that efforts and marathon diplomacy. I think Qatari side has announced more than one time that they are ready to end this crisis, which is imposed on Qatar, and they believe that any discussion can happen without a precondition, without affecting the sovereignty of the country and their independence. So these things have not been changed since 2017. So any effort in that context is welcomed and supported by the Qatari government. I say this as an expert following the story. I see that there is no change has happened, and I think they quite sure about the position of Doha when it comes to reconciliation. It's important to look at the context, I think, to all what's happening. We are about 1 month from Biden in the White House, and I think every side of this crisis is looking at the interest they can gain and the loss they are facing in after the 21st of January 2021.
Right.
So I think that the context is important, and I think it should be looked at it seriously.
For sure, the context is everything here, as a matter of fact. Annelle, if we look at the context and what has spurred this conflict in the first place, not much has really changed on the ground, the facts, have they? The boycotting countries accuse Qatar of financing extremist groups, something that Doha has vehemently denied. And the more sticking issue, perhaps, is Doha's good relations with Tehran, also something that has not changed.
Right. I think it's very interesting to keep in mind the extent to which the original 13 demands are unlikely to be met, which further reiterates that the demands themselves were more established as not that they were necessarily intended met, but more to sort of justify why the blockade had been imposed in the first place. And so moving forward, I do think it's also interesting to keep in mind that we've seen greater rapprochement between the Saudis and the Qataris, but not so much between the UAE and the Qataris. And so although there was a sort of grudging acknowledgement from the foreign minister of the Emirates acknowledging the progress in diplomacy without mentioning Qatar by name, I think thus far the Saudis have been more willing to perhaps move forward in resolving the crisis, while the UAE continues to see Qatar as a problem. And as you pointed out, not much has actually changed. The Turkish military base remains open in Qatar, which was one of the original demands. Al Jazeera remains operational, which was another demand that they asked Al Jazeera to be completely shut down. Although it has been interesting, we've noticed that Al Jazeera has toned down somewhat its critique. And I think moving forward, it will be interesting to see if some of the other networks like Sky News Arabia or Arabia will also be willing to sort of tone down their rhetoric about Qatar.
Right. Mohammed, let's look at the motivations on the part of Riyadh to seek a deal and now being willing to remove sanctions against Doha. Some people are saying that Saudi Arabia is concerned that the incoming Biden administration will exert less pressure on Iran than the Trump administration did. Do you think that's one of the impetus, one of the driving forces behind this deal?
Frankly, I didn't think so, sir. This problem we'll consider it as a local problem. Yes, maybe there will be changes. Maybe Biden administration will have a different look. But what I thought, if the Trump administration trying to solve the problem, so I think it is a waste. So less than 40 days and then they will leave. And the other thing is not because of the new administration. I think the time it took more than it should be. And maybe I didn't agree with Mr. Mahjoob when he said regarding the conditions will be changed or the details more in the discussions. I didn't think so. There is any announcement regarding this. But what we knew is the whole foreign ministers, the Saudis and the Qataris and the Secretary General of the Cooperation, Mr. Naif, everybody is happy. But also, it doesn't mean that we don't consider there is a change in the arena or in the area, or maybe there will be somehow some conditions they will ignore it and trying to set it up. But what I think generally, there is a guarantee for each country, which is the security. But one more thing important. Yesterday, I was listening to somebody from Egypt, and I hope there will be no conflict with the Egypt government. Honestly, I hope there is no conflict, but I think the Egyptians will go with their friends in Saudi, with their partners, I mean, in the GCC, to solve the problems. Other than this, I think it took longer time, And we should solve it, by the way. We should solve it early enough if the leaders get together. But due to, I'm not going to say stubborn mind, I'm not going to say nobody is trying to admit there is a problem to the neighbors. But unfortunately, nobody is willing to let's say, concede.
Right.
Regarding the own request.
Right. Mahjoob, Mohammed mentioned Egypt, and a deal may not initially include the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt. This may just be a bilateral agreement for the time being. Would Qatar be willing to accept an agreement that does not include all four boycotting countries?
It's obvious that the effort for the last year, actually between Riyadh and Doha, I mean, since the visit of Kushner to the region, just yesterday we heard reactions from Abu Dhabi and Cairo. So this tells you that how things are moving. So personally, I believe the whole effort is focusing on the communication between Doha and Riyadh, and that is what I think the Americans trying to do, especially Trump administration and the Trump family in particular. I don't see Doha. I think Doha in the last year was focusing on the relation with Saudi Arabia more than any other countries, and that was clear actually on some statements and communication which took place. And there is another point, just quickly, I want to raise here. It's important to look at the whole crisis is reaching deadlock because the four blockade countries have not reached any of what they want, and I think that also took the region with the COVID-19 to end this crisis. Actually, I think this put a lot of pressure to find a solution to ease the pressure on some governments basically facing a challenge of COVID-19 as well.
Right. Certainly there is, Annelle, there seems to be a willingness to find an agreement and to move past this conflict in the region. Let's talk about the U.S. role here for just a second. Of course, these talks were mediated by Kuwait, but also and primarily by the United States. Jared Kushner just made his visit to the region, which is being seen as a final foreign policy win for the Trump administration. Interestingly enough, Trump has been pushing Middle Eastern countries to normalize relations with Israel, UAE and Bahrain, obviously being one of them. Is that also a motivation, do you think, behind the Trump administration's move here?
Yes, I mean, I think Trump got a lot of positive attention, understandably, for the Abraham Accords, which again is important to keep in mind that was not actually a peace deal with the Palestinians. It merely sort of formalized this existing relationship between the UAE and Israel. And now, today it's possible that the vote will come forward about this arms sale to the UAE, which again would just reiterate that the Abraham Accords were really just an arms sale, which will further entrench the United States in the security of the Gulf in a way that I don't think is actually conducive to U.S. interests. But in general, I think the timing here is about Trump trying to recapture some of that positive attention that he got in August for the Abraham Accords, that if he can leave with this one more example of him being the great deal maker, then he can come back perhaps in 2024 to run again. Again, I do think it's important to keep in mind that some of this has to do with the amount of money that Qatar was paying to Iran in order to use their airspace. So $100 million that kept, I forget whether that was how frequently that was being paid, but just a large amount of money that was kind of going around the sanctions that the Trump administration kept trying to impose on Iran as part of their maximum pressure approach. And so this way, if at least the Saudi blockade is lifted, that means that Qatar will no longer pay Iran to use their airspace. And so just going back to the emphasis that the Trump administration has continually put on Iran, and that the Gulf countries themselves have sort of benefited from this myopic focus of the Trump administration and used it to serve their own agendas, namely to gain access to more weapons and again to reinforce U.S. support in the region.
And speaking of Iran, Mohammed, all four boycotting countries, your country, of course, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt, are trying to and have been trying to curb Tehran's influence in the region. Doha's relationship, however, with Tehran have only intensified, perhaps even improved during the previous 3 years. Is that still a sticking issue, sticking point for you, or is Saudi Arabia willing to see beyond this?
I think this is one of the consequences that the Qataris improved their relationship with the Iranians. Before, I thought that Iran, let's say government, or let's say the regime, was quite under severe pressure. But they had, let's say, a valve, and then they start breathing. So this is one of the difficult issues I think it will meet the delegations to solve. Because all 4 countries, plus, yeah, Egypt maybe not as the Saudis and Emirates and Bahrain, not tied with the Iranians, but this is one of the difficult. And the other thing is also, there is a lot of major problems. If we're going to talk about the challenges, I'll tell you right now. The challenges is the consequences of the cutting relationship with Qatar government. And obviously, this is what happened after the cut relation. They start supporting, unfortunately, the Houthis, and with the evidence, they tried to, let's say, lengthen the fight, and they trying to, let's say, demonizing the UAE government plus the Saudis about regarding what's happening in Yemen. See, the consequences will be real difficult to solve the problem. But I think we have a wise people. Kuwaiti government did their best, and I really depend on the 4 countries with the Kuwaiti people to solve the problems. I think we have to solve it, as people said in the beginning, the COVID-19s and the challenges also coming in. Bottom mind,
right,
the new relationship between Israel and Emirates and Bahrain. And also what's happening, like some other medias, they're talking about the prime minister in Israel, that he met the crown prince. And this is one of the demonizing the Saudis government, being supported, unfortunately, by the Qataris government, and who is working with the government allied. So the consequences is really difficult.
Right.
But I'm sure enough that all members will come over this problem and solve it.
You remain optimistic, and certainly no lack of challenges in the region and beyond during these difficult times. Mahjoob, is Qatar willing to forego its good relationships with Iran to get closer to its GCC friends again, or is that out of the question?
To be honest, I don't see any serious progress when it comes to Tehran-Doha relations, as media and a lot of experts are indicating. There was some improvement in the first 2-3 months of the crisis, which can be understood, with the exception of the airspace. There is no serious, actually, improvement on the relations. And I think that was justified. It's obvious that Doha has decided to have the open door strategy with all countries, including Iran. That is according, to Doha and security of the region. And geopolitics cannot be changed. People, they have to adopt. People, they have to learn how to live together and respect each other and respect the mutual interests of each other. I think that was obvious in the last 3 years. This did not mean there is no disagreements. Of course, there was a disagreement on when it comes to Syria, when it comes to the role in Yemen. But there's also, relations management, I call it. I think that was successful management to the relations between the 2 countries. And I think, the economic side, the economic benefit of Iran was, I'm not saying a huge, but it was very good, considering the sanctions imposed on on Iran by the United States the last 2 years, $100 million to $150 yearly, as an outcome of using airspace. That's something good, take into consideration that Iran is banned of selling its oil and other sanctions, basically hurting the economy of Iran.
Right. Annelle, Doha actually went as far as to call for talks, direct talks between the GCC and Iran. Do you think that's wishful thinking, or could there be some merit to it in the coming months and years, perhaps?
I mean, I think it could be possible, especially given that the Biden administration has signaled that rapprochement, that U.S.-Iran rapprochement is a clear priority for his administration. As we saw with the assassination of the scientist Fakhrizadeh, ostensibly by Israel, Netanyahu is very interested in trying to torpedo any kind of rapprochement between Washington and Tehran. But so far, the Iranians have shown that they're not going to respond. They're waiting to see if what Biden will do when he gets in. And moving forward, my hope is that this initial kind of reduction of tensions between Qatar and its GCC neighbors could also perhaps then be built upon to construct a regional security architecture for the region more broadly that would include Iran, that would also involve the U.S. lessening its military footprint in the region. We've heard talk of that, especially with the nomination of Biden put forward his pick for the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, who was very involved in pulling the U.S. out of Iraq. And so my hope is that moving forward, as the U.S. has a smaller military footprint, the GCC and Iran and other powerful regional actors like Turkey will acknowledge that it's all in their mutual interest to reduce tensions among each other and instead work on cooperative solutions to major problems like climate change, for example, or pandemics, as we're all currently experiencing.
Mohammed, would you agree that a Saudi-Qatari deal could be the impetus for a wider peace deal for the region? I know you're optimistic as far as the bilateral talks are concerned, but would you also say that this could be the start, also with a new incoming U.S. administration, the start for more peace and harmony in the region?
Wallahi, our region, Mr. Ali, is an unpredictable region, honestly. Sometimes things goes the way we want it, sometimes we have the difficulties. But as I'm optimistic, honestly, if the four countries get together and sit and solve the problems, we will really face the real threat. Now look at the Israeli governments. They are trying to exploit this chance, the division between the Arab, especially financially wise, strong countries. So they will exploit this. Other countries will exploit this. So hopefully that it will help, and I'm sure it will help. But there is a serious problem. The trust, I think, Qataris prove with the last 3 years there is difficulty to get together, and they thought that if we, as a Saudis or as a friends, ask them to do so, that we are intervene in their own policy, and which is not true. But since there is an agreement between the GCC countries, everybody get to stick to it. So I'm optimistic that it will solve the problem. But with the new coming administration, I hope that Mr. Biden will look at a real U.S., let's say, U.S. way in conducting with their allied, with their friends, and with their threats together and solve the problems.
Right.
Lots of challenges. I'm talking about Yemen. If you look at the Yemen condition now, the Houthis are destroying everything, and they are still firing weapons toward the Saudis. And 6 years now we are fighting with the Houthis due to maybe support, not maybe, for sure, from the Qataris and from the Iranis, that's definite. And maybe the Turkish people start getting in line. So we need this settlement to be set, and we need the whole leaders to understand that our national interest has to be in mind most of the time, if it's not all time.
Right. Mahjoob, we're almost out of time, but just quickly, this is a very unpredictable region, says Mohammed. I think we can all agree to that. How optimistic are you that this is going to play out in everyone's favor in 2021?
I would say if there is any kind of improvement or breaking, it will be breaking the ice between Doha and Riyadh. I think it's a long way to go with lack of trust and confidence between sides. I think Qataris feel they were hurted 2017. However, the willingness did not disappear at all for talk and reconciliation. It will take some time. Anything will happen. It will happen maybe gradually, starting between Doha and Riyadh.
Cautiously optimistic is what I'm hearing. Mohammed al Qubaiban, Mahjoob Zweiri, and Annelle Sheline, thank you so much for joining us and providing some context and background on a possible Saudi-Qatari deal. Thank you out there for watching. Hope to see you again next time.